probably about, 10 years ago. A bunch of us were members of the Great New Orleans Tea Party, and we came together and decided that we needed to learn more about the Constitution, because a lot of what we were experiencing during that time just didn't seem right, and it seemed like our country had gotten very far away from what our founding fathers intended. So we met kind of like our founding fathers in the back rooms of coffee shops and whatever, and started basically a book study, is what it is. The Constitutional Bootcamp, we meet once a month, and we read through the different writings of the founding fathers. The Declaration of Independence.
We covered Declaration of Independence, we covered the Federalist Papers, but it's not like school, you're not tested on it, it's not like we're drawn out for an hour going through things, we have discussions, and we try and tie it into present day activities that are going on. And part of the reason I got involved with it is I was a district commissioner with the Boy Scouts here in Jefferson Parish in Louisiana, and I was working with Eagle Scouts on the Eagle Scout projects. Well, some of the merit badges, they got 3 merit badges that all have to do with a civics type thing. Citizens of the nation, citizens of the community, and another one that escaped me right now. Reading their essays, especially on citizens of the nation, and what they're being taught in school, just flabbergasted me. Most of them, if they learn anything, they learn a little bit about the Declaration of Independence. Some of them never even heard of the Constitution. It was not taught. They figured the ones that did know the Constitution was only given the preamble of it, and 90% of that was basically, that's why they think socialism is good and we're bad. They were talking about the student loans, how that's, to buy votes, but that's only one prong of it. The other prong of it was education, so they got more years they can indoctrinate. It used to be when somebody got a doctor's degree, that was 10, 15 years into their career. Nowadays, they go through from high school to college, stay in college, get the bachelor's, move on to the master's, move on to the PhD, never actually have worked in the career field except maybe as an intern, just to get a couple of career things. And they're taught all this stuff. I've been out there at SLU since I moved to Hammond, talking with some of the students out there, and it's astounding. And I thought it was bad enough with just the college students. But if you go to the coffee shops like we do, and we talk to some of the people around there, people don't know the Constitution. It's not that big a deal as far as how big it is. It's a small little pamphlet you can carry in your pocket. And, people don't know their rights. And that's why they're not fighting for them. How many rights do you think we've lost since the 1900s?
All of them.
All of them.
Pretty much.
That's what it feels
If
like.
you think we're joking, we're not. If we've not actually lost them, they've been infringed upon so bad you can't recognize them. The First and Second Amendments are the ones that they're attacking the most. That's the one you hear about, because that's the only ones that keep this Constitution going. I was actually put on the terrorist watch list for a while and declared that I was a domestic terrorist because I did 2 things that the Attorney General of the United States thought was really, really bad. One, I enlisted in the United States Air Force and took an oath to protect the Constitution. The other one was I served 12 years in the Air Force. According to her, this was back in Obama's days, we're the #1 terrorist group, is veterans. And a lot of your local little college kids and all that, everybody's trying to get the patriotic thing going. No, they're not coming because they think we're terrorists. That's what they're being forced for. Some of the looks and some of the encounters I get when I wear a veteran shirt and go on to college campuses, you would think that I was back in the 50s wearing something about communism. It's the other way around. We have to educate people on their rights. You can't fight for something, you can't keep something if you don't know what your rights are.
And that's a lot of stuff that was talking about earlier with the voter integrity. Because if you question voter integrity, if you question the school board, then the government, puts you on a terrorist watch list. The FBI would rather investigate mothers who go to a school board and demand accountability instead of who's shooting at President Trump. You know, I mean, it's ridiculous because actually one of the parts of the First Amendment is our right to be able to redress our grievances with the government. That's a First Amendment constitutional right. And one of the things that I really like about studying the Constitution and everything is that a lot of times people will misconstrue things, you know, and they'll say, well, that's part of the Constitution. One of the things I like that people say is that it's in the Constitution that we have a right to overthrow the government. It's like, no. That's not in the, that's actually in the Declaration of Independence, sort of, when it says that governments are formed among men to provide for our basic unalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. When the government gets away from doing that, it's our right and our duty to change that government to one that does. You know, and that's right, but that's a preface.
And actually, that's also where we have the votes, that we should be able to do it by voting, and we also have the right to First Amendment free speech. That Second Amendment is way down on the list. You know, our founding fathers didn't want to go fight against England. In fact, right up to the end, most of them, even after the war, wanted to go ahead and rejoin with England because they felt they needed a stronger government, if nothing else, just for security against Spain, against France, and against the Native Americans, which I have one, by the way. Unlike Pocahontas, I can tell you my tribal roll number is 15164. But, so I'm not against the government in any way, shape, or form. That's why I served in the military, and that's why I still fight for this, because my oath of office expired, but my oath to this Constitution is none.
And for me, I just want a government that fits inside the Constitution. You know, we are so far away from there now. You think about it, our country was founded because of a 3% tax on a breakfast beverage. And look at where we are now today with the taxes. Taxes on top of taxes on top of taxes. And Kamala Harris wants to come in and raise more taxes on unrealized gains. How do you know what the gains are to tax it? I mean, it's, you know, I grew up in a time where we were fighting against communism. Today, our country's embracing it, and it's disgusting. It really is. You know, and that's why I found that having a constitutional boot camp was so important, because if we do anything here today, is to get people to realize that it's so easy for all of us to become constitutional scholars by just spending the time studying the Constitution. You know, you can go back to your community, to your groups, and you can actually have a roundtable discussion once a month and reading the writings of the Founding Fathers and become more knowledgeable so that you can share that knowledge with others. And that's the whole purpose of the Constitution Bootcamp.
The Constitution is there to preserve our rights, but if you don't know what they are, you can't. And each one of us grew up in a different time frame in America. You know, we had three branches of government that would actually fight for their own power. But in the early 1900s, they passed the 17th Amendment. That 17th Amendment took the power away from the states to protect us. Everybody thought it was going to be great. Oh, well, we get to pick our senators just like we pick our congressmen, and that would stop gridlock. Has gridlock stopped? No. You know what stopped? The ability of the states to fight back against the federal government. You know, before they could tell the congressmen, their own senators, hey, if you don't vote the way we want you to vote, then guess what? You're not being elected. We'll pick somebody else to put in your place. What happens now? The states have to go begging for our tax money that we pay to get it to come back to our states. You know, they're talking about North Carolina. Don't forget, 3 days we had people at the Superdome that didn't have water. You know,
there was a week actually where New Orleans was under chaos until General Honore rolled into downtown and told NOPD to put their guns down because they were pointing the guns at the people. You know what I mean? That's when, and you know, I've been through a few hurricanes being a native of New Orleans. I'm a 504 OG. You can see I got a few years on me here. And people need to realize that, you know, it takes a few days for everything to kind of get settled after a heavy storm like that, where, roads and electricity and internet and everything can be restored. It took us 2 weeks after Ida to get the wires and the light poles picked up off of the street because they were all knocked down. The problem is of course, in this particular instance with Hurricane Helene, is who living up in the mountains is going to have a 3-day supply ready to be prepared for a hurricane? People in Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, they weren't worried about a hurricane. The hurricane was hitting the Gulf Coast. It was hitting Tallahassee. And if it hits Tallahassee, who thought it was going to roll right up into there? And of course, I'm not even going to get into the whole conspiracy theories that I've seen about government controlling the weather and manipulating it because of the lithium sources underneath that they want. That's just a whole different story. But I don't want to get out there. Anyway, but you're in a hurricane zone. You're not going to expect to need. If you're in the mountains, you're not going to need to have a hurricane preparedness kit. Who'd have thought?
I'm a native of New Orleans. I lived through Betsy, I lived through Camille, I lived through Katrina, Rita, but I also lived in Atlanta for 12 years. I experienced at least one hurricane, I think 2. When that hurricane hit us in Atlanta, we sat on our balcony and we watched it come by because the winds were only 35, 40 miles an hour. That's what Atlantans were expecting. They were not expecting what they got now. The ones that were prepared, that had the water and stuff, they're basically what you call the preppers, or the ones that are on the list from the federal government, the ones you got to watch because they they patriots. You can't have them having their stuff. The government wants you dependent on them. When I got injured and wasn't able to work anymore, some of it was from stuff that happened while I was in the military. I'm also they got 70% disability rating from the VA. And the final straw of it, I was working at T-Mobile at the time. I was on the 6th floor of the Galleria checking on our generator because it got a low fuel alarm. We had a tornado come by and I got picked up and thrown into a fence. All right. Couldn't work. Had to fight T-Mobile for any kind of time off for it. I'm normally against unions, but it shows there is still time for unions. But right now, unions are totally, against the American way of life. The federal government would not help my family at all. Me and my wife have never had a major argument in our life. After 18 months of unemployment, living off our 401k and salary, which lost half of the 401k into paying taxes because we took it out early because I couldn't work. She went to apply for food stamps, and they basically separated us in that office. It was less than 3 weeks after we went through that visit there that we started divorce. She started looking for an attorney for divorce. They basically convinced her if we got divorced, she could get the help she needed, and for her and the son, and tell her, don't worry about me, take care of your son. Our government is against the families because they don't want us to stay together. If we divide and conquer on each and everybody, look in New Orleans, you go to the Saints game, you don't care who's next to you, the Saints win, you high-five them. They try and divide us over race, they try and divide us over our socioeconomics, they try and divide us over anything. They want to keep us divided, they want to keep us down. And that's because we don't have the rights to sit back and try and fight against what they're trying to do. I got to admit, I agree with the gentleman that was before us was saying about the corruption, the compromise, and all of that. Because I've seen it in our elected officials. One-on-one, they'll tell you one thing, but when they get up there and they make their votes, they're doing something totally different.
So, and that's how usually a Constitutional Bootcamp session goes. Is we all get together to fellowship. We talk about the Constitution. We talk about our rights. We learn about the different parts of the Constitution, the articles, why is there a separation of powers, what is the fourth article, Article 4, and why is it important? Because it brings people together, the states, it unites the states together under a federal government. But we also fellowship and talk about other issues that are important to us, and we learn more. We learn from each other. And that's why, to me, it's important for others to go back to their communities and to have some sort of monthly boot camp, you know, a little book study to get together to do a Constitutional Bootcamp. So everybody can come together and talk about things, learn from each other.
You'll find out what the founding fathers wanted as to what we got. I mean, we went through America's, quote, Civil War. Even after the Civil War, were they trying to take away the guns of the people in the South? No. President Lincoln got shot. Did they try to take the guns away after that? No. Because they understood what the guns were for. Even Lincoln understood that our right to bear arms was so we could go against the government if we needed to. Not to overthrow it, but to get it back doing what it was supposed to do. Right? Look what we got to do today. You go to the courthouse, you go to the government building, you got to go through a metal detector. You got to ask permission to be able to have a permit to be able to carry it. And that's another thing. You know, this is a right that's enumerated in the Constitution, which means it's a primary right. It's one that they thought was so valuable it needed to be in the Constitution specifically said. Look at the difference between it and a marriage license. Right? Back in the 80s or whatever, 90s, I don't remember what year, but basically, marriage was between a man and a woman. You got married in one state, you moved to another state, the states respected that license or whatever. Then some states started saying, okay, forget biology, forget science, forget religion, forget whichever way you want to do it. You got to recognize our license from Massachusetts down in Louisiana, all right? Even though it's a state license, not a federal license, because the Constitution says you have to.
And that's part of
And that's what led to all the changes. Well, how come our permit for Louisiana for carrying a firearm, you can't go to New York and force them to recognize it? It's a second-class license. Yet it's in the Constitution. Where is marriage in the Constitution? Maybe it falls under the right of happiness, but from what I said in divorce rate, I don't know if I want to say that. But that's the kind of manner we go back and forth. We discuss different things like that. We try to put a little humor to it. We want to make sure that people learn and understand, get energized to try and get people, their neighbors, to come talk about it. You know, each one of y'all, all you got to do is learn a little bit of it. Read up about it, read up as to why this particular law was put into place, or Constitution, why they felt we needed these rights, you know, because they knew history. They had just lived through it. They knew they didn't want a king, they didn't want dictatorship, and the only way that they were going to have a ruling, it was a brand new kind of style of government, of the people, by the people, and for the people, was if the people were armed and able to keep it.
Well, and that's true, and that's what the actual right, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's the enumerated right. But it didn't start, that right just didn't appear in 1791, you know, with our founding fathers. Our founding fathers were academics. I mean, they studied 17th and 18th century philosophers like Locke and Montesquieu. But they also studied the ancients like Aristotle and Cicero. And they looked back throughout the eons that the right of the absolute natural human right of self-defense and self-preservation predates our Constitution. It is an absolute right, on you know, despite whatever dimension Joe has to say. You know, it's an absolute right, and it is to protect our absolute inalienable rights. And when we talk about absolute inalienable rights, those are not in the Bill of Rights. Those are actually in the Declaration of Independence, which they say the right to the unalienable right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if you look at the Bill of Rights, those 10 amendments, which has probably about 24 rights contained within the 10 amendments. You'd learn that going to a boot camp, because that's what you do is you study these things. And you look at that and it's like, Those rights contained in the Bill of Rights, the 10 Amendments, those actually protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
There was also the supreme law of the land, which means it's above the judges, it's above the president, it's above the Congress, and it's above the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court gives an interpretation that is so vague, it's not even recognizable, like Bill Clinton, the definition of his is, I mean, everybody knows it's ridiculous. Well, what happened to the word shall? Shall used to mean something. Shall not used to mean something. It says you shall not go past 65 miles an hour if you're driving through Metairie on the interstate. Otherwise, you can stop and get a ticket. I guarantee you, they know what shall means on that.
The Constitution has the separation of powers, Articles 1, 2, and 3, where it talks about the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. 3 co-equal branches of government. And when we talk about the courts are supposed to be the arbiters between the government and the people. And instead, unfortunately, too many times, the courts are basically siding with the government, parroting and mimicking the government's interpretation, instead of using the Constitution as the litmus test. And it should be, since the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, it should be that all laws begin and end with the Constitution, like the Alpha and the Omega. It was Justice Marshall in Marbury v. Madison that said that when Congress passes a law that is repugnant to the Constitution, it is the duty of the courts to strike it down as null and void. You know, myself personally, and getting ready to stop it in a second here, myself personally, I'm working on repealing the National Firearms Act. The National Firearms Act was passed in 1934, which regulates a subclass of arms. And the Second Amendment does not allow for a subclass of arms. It just simply says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So the NFA is an actual infringement on the Constitution. I mean, I may be back up here later to talk more about the Second Amendment and the NFA, but for now, I think that we've reached our time. I just want to remind y'all, we are 31 days from fundamentally transforming to make America great again. Make sure you get out there. Thank you.
All right, George, thank you very much for appreciating that.